when you watch something on TV, you are inviting that thing into your mind. And if it's not true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, etc., then I would say there's a good chance you're not honoring this verse. Now, that doesn't mean that everything that we take in needs to be, sunshine and roses and marshmallows and cotton candy. There is room, I think, even in this verse to interact with things that are heavy and that are real. Things like that can be true and honorable. Just honestly try to reflect your movie and TV choices through this verse and see what comes out. As the culture turns its back on God, many Christians are missing out on the fulfilling life God has for his people. That's why we created the Innerfire Podcast. Join me, Andrew Carroll, and my dad, Scotty, as we confront modern complexities with timeless truth so that you can be equipped to live out the Word. We hope this podcast is a blessing to you. So this is part 2 of our conversation about leisure. Now, a lot of our leisure time is taken up with entertainment. So we need to dedicate some time to that, figure out what the proper Christian approach to entertainment is. You have anything you want to say at the outset?
Well, I'll just repeat what I said in the first podcast. You need to have an open mind going into this. If you already know what you're going to do with your entertainment and you're just listening to this, not willing to entertain a new thought about your entertainment, I hate to say it, but, again, you're probably wasting your time because we're going to confront some things that the modern Christian culture just overlooks, doesn't give any much concern to in general. How do I know this? Because in my interaction with Christians, I hear the forms of entertainment they're taking in, and it's going to be in opposition to some of what we say today. So I really implore you to listen to the podcast, to continue on and hear what we have to say about entertainment, the lines that we are going to draw or at least discuss. Your lines might be different than my lines. We're going to find that out as we go through here. But just, have an open mind as we dig into the entertainment that we should be participating in or taking in.
I don't usually say this, but if you haven't listened to part 1, this is an instance where I would encourage you to do so.
Yeah.
We did try to lay a foundation for everything that we're going to say in the next few podcasts last time. So you can decide whether or not you want to be a part of this conversation by listening to that one. But entertainment, what does the Bible say about it? Now, I find that most references to entertainment are not positive. That doesn't mean that entertainment itself is wrong, of course. But I just want to point out a few instances where we see people entertaining themselves in the Bible and kind of what that looked like. We get one really early on in Exodus when Moses is on Sinai and the people decide that he's never coming back. And they decide to fashion the golden calf. There was a little bit of entertainment that happened as they were doing this. And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Oh, that sounds all right. It would be worthwhile to look at the different translations of Exodus 32:6 to really get the full meaning there. This is not the kind of play that you do on a football field or on a basketball court or in your backyard. It appears that this was some kind of orgy, which would not be that uncommon among pagan spirituality, right?
It was a big part of pagan spirituality, even into New Testament days. If you look at the feast that happened, a lot of the idol worship that happened in the temple, I mean, the temples were full of prostitutes.
Yeah, right.
And part of the worship was spiritual, was sexual activity, of various forms that we don't need to get into all the details, but it was definitely part of this word play that is used. And we find in the New Testament, this exact phrase is quoted, in a way such that this is what we should avoid. Right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and let us not forget to say that orgies and promiscuity are still very much a part of pagan spirituality. Now, these days, it occurs, at least in our context, among those who would probably not call themselves pagans, but, we know that they are. And if you think that this sort of hypersexuality, this sort of glorification of sexuality or whatever, has not seeped its way into modern entertainment, then you are at best willfully blind. Mm-hmm. I mean, our entertainment is saturated with pornographic imagery, and we'll get into that later. Okay, what about Samson and the Philistines? Samson was taken captive by the Philistines. He was a great warrior. Again, this would not be unheard of in such a culture. During one of their parties or whatever, they decided to haul Samson out and humiliate him to sort of bask in the victory that they had taken over him. Here's what that looked like. And when their hearts were merry, we talked about the word merry last time.
Yeah, when they were all got good and drunk.
Good and drunk, they said, "Call Samson that he may entertain us." So they called Samson out of the prison, and he entertained them. They made him stand between the pillars. Now the house was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, and on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women who looked on while Samson entertained. So I think that if we wanted to contextualize it for today, we could generalize this to exploitative entertainment. And I see a lot of exploitation in reality television.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm going to wade out into some waters here, okay? Mm-hmm. I'm not a regular Dr. Phil viewer, okay? But it is my sense, based off of what I have seen, that the main appeal of that show is to look at and mock the people who he has on. And there are a lot of shows like that. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people that get hauled in front of cameras by scheming, conniving producers so that the rest of us can look at them and sort of guffaw. And it's wrong. It's inhumane. Not, in my mind, the occupation of a Christian. And man, only in the first 5 minutes, I wonder how many people I've upset. But I do see that.
Well, I mean, in the account you're reading there of Samson, let's keep in mind this is the ungodly Philistines mm-hmm. making sport of Samson, mm-hmm. who was a great defeater of the Philistines. I mean, he killed 1,000 of them, at one time with the jawbone of a donkey at one point. Yep. So, but what we're saying is what the Philistines were doing, who any Christian would recognize as a paganistic society who was in direct opposition to God, what they were doing to Samson, we often do to those among us.
Right.
And so if we don't like what they were doing, we need to examine what we're doing and how we are entertaining ourselves in a similar fashion. And is that right? Is that God honoring? Because we're talking about leisure, right? In the big picture, what do we do with this time that we have available to us when we are not obligated to something else? And oftentimes it is entertainment. We entertain ourselves in front of a TV or some other thing. And so, yeah, it's worth looking at.
Yeah. Is it entertaining to look at someone and say, wow, what an object of shame?
Yeah, what
Yes,
an
it
idiot.
is.
What an idiot.
Yeah.
What a goofball.
What a freak.
Yeah.
Man, we think that we're so far past the age of the circus where we go and we just behold the freaks of nature. We're not.
Yeah.
It's entertaining. I'll be the first to say that. I've experienced it. I don't think that there's a place for that in the life of a Christian. Okay, so that's a few examples of entertainment. And
so let me just ask a question there. So you just made the statement that's not for the life of a Christian.
yeah.
Okay, so what I heard was you just drew a line. We're talking about drawing some lines. So you just drew a line there.
Yeah.
So what did you cut out? You cut out Dr. Phil.
Well,
you cut out reality TV series. Maybe like
Hoarders.
Hoarders.
My 600-pound life.
Yeah,
You take your pick of the
yeah,
TLC shows.
Well, reality TV is the norm today, right? I mean, The Bachelor.
Reality TV.
Yeah. Just take your pick. But anyway, go ahead.
Let me say, I have heard some thoughtful discussion on Dr. Phil.
Mm-hmm.
Some shows are more exploitative than others. So, yeah, I would say I can't really think of what the purpose of a show like Hoarders is other than to just behold the person, right? Now, I understand people say, oh, it's so interesting to like see their psychology and like what motivates them and stuff. Yeah, that's all. I get it. But at what cost, right? At the cost of the humiliation of this poor person who's saddled by this psychological condition. I think that there must be a better way. Okay. So yes, I suppose I did kind of axe those. Goodness, we're going to get in so much trouble. Okay. What we're talking about is, at least at the moment, what we're watching. Now, there are many more forms of entertainment than that, but we want to stick on this one for this podcast. And I think that before we get into that, again, we need to lay a spiritual, or a biblical, I should say, foundation. We cited this last time. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. That is a verse to carry around in your pocket for your whole life. Here's one that might be a little bit more to the point. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. That's Philippians 4:8. Okay, when you watch something on TV, you are inviting that thing into your mind. And if it's not true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, etc., then I would say there's a good chance you're not honoring this verse. Now, that doesn't mean that everything that we take in needs to be, sunshine and roses and marshmallows and cotton candy, right? There is room, I think, even in this verse to interact with things that are heavy and that are real and that are even harsh. I think that things like that can be true and honorable, and perhaps even more so for their reality. So I'm not saying like, well, let's just watch, drone footage of the Amazon rainforest. It's not what I intend to say. But what I do intend to say is just honestly try to reflect your movie and TV choices through this verse and see what comes out.
Well, I think what that verse is saying is fix your heart and mind upon things that draw you upward.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you read through that list again, it is a lot of those descriptors are things that we could apply to God, you know. And so are we being drawn upward toward God, or is our mind being drawn downward away from the things of God into the gutter, we might say?
Mm-hmm.
And is, you know, here's the thing with entertainment. And I don't know why we have such a hard time grasping and applying this concept. You know, it's a very widely accepted concept. Garbage in, garbage out. You know, we are what we take in. We
Mm-hmm.
become what we take in.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're spending time looking at that stuff, let's go back to the exploitative TV stuff. If we're watching that all the time, then what happens when we see somebody on the street that is in a similar condition? We tend, rather to extend a helping hand, we tend to mock and make fun of that person for their problem, whatever that problem might be. Mm-hmm. That's how the stuff comes out of us. Mm-hmm. That is our immediate response. Mm-hmm. We tend to be mockers and jesters rather than edifying the people that we run into and lifting them up out of the mire. Mm-hmm. We tend to just push them back down through our actions. And I don't think we realize we're doing this. Mm-hmm. But this is what happens when we take this stuff in. This is why we need to be very guarded about our selections of entertainment. Specifically now we're talking about movies and TV. And ask ourselves the question. And I'm just sorry. People don't want to think about it. You know, they're being entertained by it. I'll say their flesh enjoys whatever they're participating in watching. And so they just say, you know, I just don't think about it. I mean, it's no different than overspending or overeating or any other area of our life. We don't want to have the discipline to examine ourselves. You know, examining our heart can be a very troubling thing. When we turn the lens inward and say, why am I doing this? What is this? What kind of an effect is this having to me, mm-hmm. on me? Mm-hmm. Oftentimes we don't like what we see.
Yep.
Therefore, we just don't look.
Yep.
We turn a blind eye to it. And we just don't need to be doing that. If we're going to be impactful as Christians, then, you know, we've got to ask ourselves these questions. You know, I think, you know, a lot of times people watch things that they would not watch with their 6-year-old. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I would say a good thing to do is ask yourself, if my 6-year-old can't watch this with me, why is that? Mm-hmm. And what is the content? Now, you know, back to some of the stuff you said, okay, maybe it's a heavy thing that we need to see. You know, I'm not even sure that would count as leisure time. To me, that's almost something that would be needful for us to examine, to go take action on, or something like that.
Right.
But just as a general guideline, I'm just thinking about this off the top of my head. I haven't thought through it, but you know, when we're talking about drawing lines, if your 6-year-old can't watch it with you, is it something you need to be taking in?
Right. Well, you know, as you say, there are heavy things which are not suitable for the mind of a 6-year-old that are not necessarily bad. Perhaps you could come at it from this approach. If you're sitting down watching something, ask yourself, am I hoping that my 6-year-old will watch this when he grows up? Do I want that for him? Mm-hmm. Or do I want something more? And maybe the answer to that question will be somewhat illuminating. I have a little piece of driving advice for anyone who wants it. You go where you look. This is something that the people who live in really icy environments especially need to be aware of. When you're sliding on the ice, what do they tell you? Look where you want to go. Okay, this is true of all of life. You know, the Bible talks a lot about not turning to the right or to the left. Proverbs even says, let your gaze be directly before you. You know, you think about it in terms of driving. You're riding down the road, everything's hunky-dory, and then suddenly there's an anomaly on the side of the road. Mm-hmm. It's a distraction. You look at it. What's the next thing that happens? You start headed towards it, right? Uh-huh. I think that this is part of the reason that accidents can become these big pileups. Because someone gets in an accident, suddenly everyone's looking at it, and the next thing you know, they're about to hit it themselves. Okay, mm-hmm. It's true in life in general. What you're choosing to let in through your eyes, I'll say more generally through your senses, that's where you're headed. Mm-hmm. Whether you like it or not, you are choosing to go there by choosing to look at it. It's a law of nature. I talk a lot on this podcast about the importance of how we direct our attention. And this is a very clear example. Mm-hmm. When you direct your attention at that TV screen and whatever images are being thrust at you, that's leading you somewhere. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you just need to sit down and ask, if I watch this movie, where is that leading me? Mm-hmm. And is that a place I want to go? Is that a place that God wants me to be?
Yeah, for sure. The song that came to mind as you were talking there is, I haven't heard it in a long time, but we sing it to our children. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little feet, where you go. Mm-hmm.
Careful, little ears, what you hear.
Yeah. And I can't exactly remember.
Careful, little mouth, what you say, I think is also.
Yeah, for the Father up above, I wish I could remember.
Is looking down in love, right?
There you go. So, I think, we're not living isolated lives away from God. He sees what we do. Why would we sing that to our children and then ignore it as adults? Mm-hmm. Is the principle true? Or are we singing falsehood to our kids?
Right.
This is a question. it's a valid question, is it not? Why do we sing that song? But then we think when we turn some magical age, we don't have to, we just ignore it anymore. And I think mm-hmm. that's what we're advocating for. Mm-hmm. Be careful about what you watch mm-hmm. And where you go and the things that you participate in. Entertainment specifically right now. So yes, is it drawing us upward? Is it drawing us down into the gutter?
Mm-hmm. I'll give you one more diagnostic question to ask. This is a question that's very much lost, I think, on modern Christians, but I think was emphasized more in ancient times. Is this the movie you want to be watching when Jesus comes back? When Jesus comes,
there's your Christian question.
Right. When he comes through, but the Bible talks about be mindful of what you do, right? Because you don't know the day or the hour.
Well, it also says, there were the virgins that were watching. Right. They had their candles trimmed and their lanterns well fueled, uh-huh. and then you have the ones that were not. Uh-huh. And so, it is definitely a biblical principle. Are we expecting the return of Christ, or are we living our lives as if it will never happen?
Right.
And I think, I think that's a question we need to ask.
Yeah. Right.
Hedonism, right, is informed. Paul said it, I think, there in Corinthians. Where he basically said, if there be no resurrection, then eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow you die.
Right.
And that is the way that we tend to live when we cut God out of the picture.
Yeah.
Death is coming. Then after death is judgment. But it's not just about eternity. It's about the impact we're having now. Mm-hmm. And, I think your question earlier when we were talking about the 6-year-old, when you said, do you want your 6-year-old to watch this when you grow up? I think that's a valid question that we need to ask ourselves just in general terms. Who is the person I want to be? What is my purpose? And if I'm watching this now, is there any reasonable expectation that my 6-year-old doesn't have a valid excuse to do it? And probably he's going to do it as soon as he gets an opportunity and you're not looking. right? Because you have validated that it's a good thing to do.
That's right.
Through your actions.
Yes. Whether you said it's good or not.
Oh yeah, you said that you don't need to be doing this, but I'm doing this. We all know that doesn't work.
Right. Now look, I'll be the first to say that there are good movies. And I mean really good movies. Not just movies that are well made, but movies that have a good heart about them.
Sure.
You could probably say the same for some TV shows, although I'm aware of fewer of those. It's not just a question of watch movies or not watch movies. When you choose to watch a bad movie, it's not just that you're choosing to watch a movie, but you're choosing not to watch a good movie, right? Every movie you watch from here to the moment you die could be a good movie, and you would never run out of them, okay? Mm-hmm. So it's not a question of, well, I ran out of good stuff to watch, which, if that has happened anyway, that there might be some more questions worth asking. But yeah, it's choosing something bad over something good. There is good stuff out there. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me say one more thing before we move more particularly into the question of movies and television. When we ask ourselves these questions, different people are going to get different answers back. As we said last time, the finest lines are drawn at the level of the individual. Let us always be sensitive to the conscience of our brother. And just to remind everyone of a well-known passage, it is not good to eat or drink or do anything that causes your brother to stumble. Okay, maybe a movie or a TV show is okay for you. You have a clear conscience about it. You don't feel convicted about it, but your brother does. Okay, the answer in that case is never for him to come to you, but for you to go to him. Protect your brother's consciences. Mm-hmm. Okay, now, movies and TV. Let me try that again. Should Christians watch R-rated and TVMA? I have to say that now because a lot of the movies are on streaming services. Mm-hmm. Movies and TV shows.
No.
Okay.
I mean, based on our conversation that we've just had, I think the only conclusion you could draw is the short answer to that is no. You know, there would be a line drawn there where you just don't need to be taking it in. And, you know, I can see the angst of people who might be hearing this coming out. And because, let's be completely honest and real, vast numbers of Christians are watching and taking in movies that contain intense violence, intense profanity, vulgarness, nudity, inappropriate sexual scenes, both in movies and TV. So we have to ask ourselves, you know, we just talked about all of it. What is that doing to my mind? Is it desensitizing me at best, and at worst, pulling me into those types of activities, that type of language, that type of attitude? I mean, what goes in is going to eventually come out.
Okay. Let's get a little bit more precise about this. Let's take violence, for example. What really is the moral implication of witnessing violence? Of course, when you're watching a movie, you know that it's not real, but you know, as time goes on, these things look more and more realistic. If essentially you're looking at probably what you would see if you did see someone get shot, or did see someone get in a car accident, or did see someone get, you know, fill in the blank, all these sort of violent things. Even in the stories that we sit around the living room and tell each other, there are very violent things in them. Okay, violent things happen to people. Now, one point that we definitely need to make that we may emphasize more later is that representing something visually and representing something in word is very different. With that in mind, what I really want to ask you is it all right to view something that we'll call violent in any capacity?
You mean, when you say any capacity, you mean outside of what capacity would it be if you're not taking it in via a movie or TV? You're talking about going to an event where it happens, or where would you be talking about?
I'm speaking more in terms of degree. Mm-hmm. So even in a PG or G movie, mm-hmm. there would be something that we could consider violent, mm-hmm. right? So when is it stop being okay? Is it ever okay? I just want to get a little bit more precise about this.
Well, I think in olden times, if you were taking in a show, say a movie, and someone was shot, for instance, okay, you hear the gun go off, they double over and they fall on the ground. And that's about the end of it, right? Today, you see blood splatter on the wall. You see things gushing out. It's just so much more graphic, right?
Yeah.
It's like a drug in that you have to. It seems like the movie folks believe you have to make it more and more graphic and more real, because just having somebody double over and fall on the ground doesn't cut it anymore, right? Mm-hmm. So I do think the more graphic that it is, the more of an impact it has on you. Mm-hmm. I know some people who view these things, it just doesn't leave their mind. Mm-hmm. And so it has even more of an impact maybe than others. But I don't know exactly. I haven't thought through a description of what violence would be okay. Mm-hmm. Is a fist fight okay, but shooting somebody is not? I don't know where those lines are.
Right. Okay. Well, I would say you can make a case artistically for something being more graphic, or I would say more realistic, mm-hmm. in that it creates a more believable experience, mm-hmm. which is largely the job of a filmmaker. I will also say some filmmakers make their movies graphic beyond the point of realism for effect. Mm-hmm. So that's also something worth thinking about. Here's what I'll say. I think that stories that are meaningful sometimes involve violent incidents, sometimes involve graphic injuries and whatnot. I wouldn't close the door on that necessarily, but I can tell, because I'm very sensitive to this, when I'm watching a movie, if the filmmaker is enjoying the violence or if the violence is a matter of the story, mm-hmm. right? There are some movies that you go and watch them for the violence. Now, even in that category of movies, mm-hmm. you're working with two different things. There's some violence that is very stylized, that is really mostly intended as a sort of fun. Mm-hmm. There's some violence that is just intended to be very gruesome, very impactful, very gory, etc. So you need to weigh the difference between those as well. I would say avoid any movies that revel in the violence. Now, one more thing I'll say about that is that your ability to even discern that is going to be hampered if you watch that kind of stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. Now, I'll confess here, I have seen plenty of very violent films in my life. And I was never a squeamish person. It didn't bother me that much. It didn't stay with me. It wasn't in my mind all the time. So I thought, okay, I guess I'm the kind of person that can take this. Well, then I married my sweet, beautiful wife, Courtney, who is very sensitive to movies in general. And around the time that I got with her, it's more or less as a matter of course, I stopped watching those things. Since then, I have been resensitized to it. And going back and seeing things that I used to watch and think nothing of, I'm appalled. Be very careful. you may need to spend some time away from that kind of stuff to even be able to see it clearly. I mean, now that I am sort of out of that cycle, the graphic stuff that appears in a lot of movies and TV, it does stick with me. It does disturb me. It does, dare I say, upset me. So I have a much lower threshold for violence than I used to, and especially violence that is being enjoyed, dare I say, sadistically by the filmmaker, intended to be enjoyed sadistically by the viewer.
Well, I think we have to ask ourselves this question. What is it in me that enjoys seeing someone's head get blown off?
Probably not something good.
Yeah, I mean, just, what is it in me that enjoys seeing a female be abused in some form or fashion?
Or a male be abused, for that matter.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking, these are the kind of things that we're seeing, that people are watching in entertainment. And we have to ask ourselves, what part of me is enjoying this? And is it the God-honoring part? Was it doing to my spirit? Is it my spirit and my godly spirit enjoying it, or is it just some dark aspect of my flesh enjoying it? The people that routinely take in this, or would watch it and not think about it, I would ask you this question. If you lived in biblical times, or if we still today had gladiator matches, where we literally went into a theater and watched people be killed, or we brought in wild animals and watched them be eaten alive, is that something you would participate in?
Yeah, right.
And if not, if the answer is, oh no, I would never go watch somebody be eaten alive. I mean, that's is it not what they did for sport? Was that not entertainment?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if you say, I would never do that, but then you turn on the TV or you go pay to go into a movie and you watch the exact same thing happen and you walk out saying, I've been entertained, is it not the same?
Well, it might be the same in your heart. So obviously the answer to what you're saying is, well, no one actually got killed, in the making of this movie. Okay, the only reason people are not getting killed now is because you don't have to actually kill them for the entertainment to be there. And we're going to get this a lot in this entertainment topic, because people will make the case for graphic, vulgar, profane sort of material on the grounds that it is a safer version than the real thing. Okay, so what am I talking about? People say, men, it's actually good for them to play violent video games because then they tend to be less violent. It's good for them to watch porn and masturbate because then they're less promiscuous. It's like, yeah, I don't think this is the kind of advancement in society that you might want to think it is. So, I would dare say, if we didn't have these graphic movies and whatnot, if we didn't, for whatever reason, have access to them, we would still have the Colosseum.
Well, again, I would ask a question like this. Okay, if you had if you knew there was going to be a shootout and people were going to be killed, and it was going to happen down at the corner of Main and Oak Street at 2 p.m., somehow or another you could predict this, would you say, I'm just going to take my lawn chair down there and I'm just going to watch while multiple people are killed and just take in the show? I mean, I think people would say that is absurd. But if we watch it on TV or we watch it in a movie, is there, I'm just asking an honest question here. Are we catering? I mean, isn't there some overlap in those situations? Yeah. Or are we dismissing it just by saying, well, it's not real, it's just made up? It's what happens. Again, as we said at the onset, I want people to examine their hearts. I'm not providing an answer to the question that I just asked. I'm asking people to think about it, because what if you were what my experience has been is when somebody is exposed to that in real life, they come away with things like PTSD. And their mind is altered, and they're troubled in their spirit, and they have trouble sleeping. But yet we think we can take it in as a movie because it's not real. It doesn't have the same measure of effect, but doesn't it move the scale somewhere?
Yeah.
Isn't it similar in some way?
Yeah. I would say there's obviously a difference when no one actually got killed and you know that it's a movie and it's not real. I'm not saying there's no difference there, but I think that last point you made is really the key thing. That does not therefore mean that it has no impact, right? It does.
Well, and to me, part of reason I'm using these things that some people are going to say, well, that's ridiculous. You can't draw those kind of analogies. What I'm really asking people to do is examine their heart and ask themselves, what part of me is enjoying this that I'm seeing, And so, yeah, I know we're going, like you said, we're going to probably get a lot of pushback. I'd love to hear people's opinions. If you got an opinion on this that's biblically based and that you can back up with Scripture, because, see, this is where we tend to diverge, I think. You can't quote, think on these things and go through the list of things to think about and then say, yeah, that's why I watch TV. That doesn't seem like it would be a justification in most cases. So what is the justification? I would love for somebody to send us an email or give us a comment and explain what is the biblical justification for doing it.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear their thoughts. Which, by the way, we probably should have read this at the outset. Psalm 101:3, I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless. That's the ESV. Other translations, I think, are a little bit more hard-hitting. The NLT, for example, says, I will refuse to look at anything vile and vulgar. In the context of this, I believe this is a Psalm of David. He's talking about keeping his way pure. The remainder of the verse says, I hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not cling to me. What you set before your eyes is a part of the purity of your walk. So, having discussed violence, that's not all there is in these movies. There's an abundance of foul language, coarse humor, and nudity. So let's take foul language first. I'm going to go the same place I did with the violence thing. Is it wrong to hear a cuss word?
No, I mean, they're foisted upon us all the time.
Right. So the question that we all have to ask ourselves is at what point does it become wrong? Now, when people cuss around us, we might wish that they would not. Okay. But when you watch something that has a bunch of foul language in it, well, then you're choosing it.
Absolutely.
So that's different, hearing it out in the wild than hearing it come out of your TV. Now, again, it's hard to draw lines here. I will say, again, if you're sensitized to it, it will just bother you and you won't want to listen to this foul language all the time. But also, we can at least say that you should not be hearing it in such a capacity that it makes you more likely to utter it yourself. And there is a direct relationship between how much you listen to it and how likely you are to let those words come out of your mouth yourself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just being desensitized to it. The Bible speaks specifically about, vile communication and guarding our tongue, our lips about what we say. It just desensitizes us to it, and we'll begin to pick up on it and use it if we're not extremely careful.
Yeah. All right, so let's deal with the last member of the trifecta here, nudity. Now, as you have seen, I can give a little leeway when it comes to violence. I might even give a little bit of leeway when it comes to coarse language. I see the utility in these from a storytelling perspective, etc. But nudity, graphic nudity, I draw a hard line and I say, whatever utility this has for the story, it's not worth it. I mean, just for the simple purpose that you don't want to pay to have somebody do that, right? It's like, if you're a man, would you like your wife to go undress in front of a camera crew and then what's filmed there be displayed for millions of people? Do you want that? Well, you're paying for somebody else to do it, right? That's what it takes for these scenes to be filmed. And, you know, people are going to say, oh, but like, it helps the story move along. I watch Game of Thrones, all the nudity in there and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's all a part of, you know, the whole story, and
makes it real. You couldn't. You're faking out reality if you don't do that kind of stuff, because that's what really happens. I mean, that's the general line that I get if this comes.
Yeah. I'll just say I'm calling your bluff right here. I don't believe you. I don't think that it's necessary. I think that there are movies that deal. I think that Sound of Freedom is actually a decent example of this. Deal with the most atrocious things in tasteful ways. Okay? You can get the point across. You can tell the story without all of that obscenity. So, like, I can't believe I even have to say this, but I do. If you're a Christian, you should not be watching stuff with graphic nudity in it.
Well, when you say graphic nudity, what do you mean? If you can explain it in a audience appropriate way.
Yeah, I mean, we could even have a conversation about that, but you know, I would say whatever you're likely to see at a beach, it's probably a lot of skin, but not graphic nudity, right? Whatever is covered up at the beach is probably graphic nudity. Does that make sense? Now, does that mean that you should be watching movies with a bunch of scantily clad people in them, even if there's no graphic nudity? No. It's like, just have a little honesty about this. You know what the filmmaker is doing. You know what you're doing. You know that whether it's intended or not, it's at least hazardous. This is one area that I'm just going to close the door, and I don't think that there's room for anything else.
Yeah, you know, I tend to agree with you. I'm just thinking of movies that I've seen over my lifetime and trying to think, okay, is there any plausible reason why it should have happened, that I should have watched it? I can't come up with a biblical argument against you to say that. And so I'm not even a movie person. I don't watch a lot of movies in general for a lot of the reasons that we're talking about here. They're not helpful. So yeah, I cannot really push back on you on that one.
Yeah, I understand. People are always going to make the argument for artistic liberty.
Yeah.
And I get it, but like, those same people would not advocate that you depict a child being raped on screen. It's like, okay, I see. So there are some things that are out of bounds, even from the perspective of the open-minded artist. Once we've established that, then it's a short step to where I am, right? Some things are just not worth it.
Well, I think we just, as you said, you can tell stories without going there, right? And to me, that is what we should be focused on. You know, we have just come to accept that these things are going to happen, and to your point, we need to examine, why are they happening? You know, is that really being inserted into the movie so I can get the rated R rating so that more people will watch it, because it is catering to the base part of human nature? You know, I think, you know, if I could maybe make an analogy between business and this, when we manage our business, what I've always tried to tell people is, if we've got one person who is creating a problem, a lot of times what we want to do is we're like, okay, let's make a rule, and we will make a rule to protect against that person when maybe the 99% of the other people are not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I call that managing to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
We don't need the rules for 99% of the people. We're making it for that one. So let's don't make it. Let's just fire that person. And so I think what the filmmakers are doing is they are making movies that cater to the lowest common denominator of man. They understand the baseness of human nature. They understand the thirst for inappropriateness, I guess is just a broad term I can use to cover all the different areas where we there's something in humans. It's not the good part of human. It's part of the fallen sin nature that does enjoy that stuff. They take advantage of it. They use it to their advantage. And what we've seen in our society is like I said earlier, the graphic nature of sexuality and violence and everything else just gets more and more and more because it takes more to feed the drug, to feed the addiction.
That's right.
Right. And so what we're asking people here, and I know we're getting close to the end and need to kind of wrap this up, but what we're asking people to do, not to take our lines necessarily, I'm not asking people, you might be asking people, not necessarily to take our lines and apply them to your own life, but to examine where your lines are and why those lines have been drawn in those particular places, if you even have lines. And if you're taking in the type of material that we're talking about, why are you taking it in? Is there not some alternative that you can use with your entertainment and your leisure to draw you closer to God while still providing you the good benefits of leisure? I mean, that's the question. Please examine yourself.
Yeah. I think asking the question is very important. And the things that I say are as much to challenge the listener, perhaps more so, than they are with the intent of the listener simply adopting them.
Sure.
So, yes, just think about it for yourself and do so honestly. I want to hit on one more thing before we wrap up here. We're running short on time. But since we're talking about things that we watch, should we be watching depictions of Jesus Christ in film and TV? The Chosen is super popular among Christians. The Passion of the Christ, as far as I know, unless it's been replaced, was the highest grossing rated R movie of all time. For some people, it's the only rated R movie they've ever seen. Some people who don't, I mean, if you wanted to make the case for a quote unquote positive use of graphic violence, people might point to that movie, right? Because it's very graphic. What do you think about that?
Well, I think this goes back to the second commandment, is where most people go back to when they're talking.
Yeah, we have that here if you want me to read it.
Just read that real quick.
You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth.
Yeah, so that's the verse that's oftentimes quoted when people talk about images of Jesus. And most time they're talking about pictures, but certainly that would extend to movies and those kind of things. I think it's an inappropriate use of that verse, because the next verse talks about bowing down to those things and worshiping them. And in that verse, it doesn't say don't make any images of God. It's basically saying don't make any images of anything.
That's true.
I mean,
if you take it in that sense, then that is what it means.
Yes, I mean it's talking about anything above in the heavens, or anything above the earth or on the earth or below the earth. I mean, we're talking about the sun, the moon, the flowers, the animals, our kids. I mean, if you read the verse literally, that's what it's saying. It doesn't say don't make an image of Jesus, right? And so. But I think the intent of the verse is don't worship those things.
Yeah.
I think where people where people have drawn a line and say, don't make any images of Jesus, is they understand the nature of ourselves to take an image and to have it supplant the real person of God. The part of God that just, the extent of God that cannot be captured in a picture, right? I mean, because if you look at things that have happened, I mean, somebody in Italy makes a piece of toast and there appears to be an image of Jesus that comes out of the toaster. And literally people from all around the world will come and view this, and so these things happen.
Yeah.
And so that's the part of us, I think, that people who have promoted this idea of no images of Jesus, I think that's where they're coming from. And I understand that line of thinking. I just don't think it's necessarily appropriate. If you look at the temple, there were a lot of images in the temple.
Yeah.
They weren't of Jesus, obviously, but they were a lot of the things that were listed in that verse right there.
That's right.
And so what was the utility of those?
Right.
Why were those in there? Certainly people could have started worshiping the cherubims that were above the mercy seat or whatever. But, we just have to, I think, apply a measure of practicality to that and look at the whole of Scripture, not just pull this one verse and say, don't make an image of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'll just say briefly, to the degree that images of Jesus are wrong, I don't think they're wrong because of Exodus 24. Right. I agree with you that extending that to that is a misapplication of that verse. You've rightly pointed out that images of things in heaven above and on earth beneath and in the water under the earth not just appeared, but were commanded by God to be created. You bring up the Ark of the Covenant. That's a great example. The cherubim above the mercy seat. And that one's particularly interesting because it's not just an image. It's an image meant to be used in worship, Yeah,
exactly.
So, but as you say, it is correct that we are forbidden to make idols.
Yes.
Perhaps this is the reason that the Ark of the Covenant is yet lost, because what would we do with it if we had it? People put too much faith in the Ark of the Covenant when they had it. There's no doubt we would do the same now. But I'm going to be honest, depictions of Jesus still make me uncomfortable in spite of that. I suppose what it is just the impossibility of representing him correctly. The impossibility of any human to give a representation of Christ that does not fail to capture his essence to such a degree that it's insulting. I just think that's more or less an impossibility. I will also say all the images that we see in the temple and the tabernacle, none of them are images of God himself. Now, you could make the case that God made an image of himself in Jesus Christ. So you could point to that. But I won't say anything stronger than this. It makes me uncomfortable.
I don't disagree with you. We have no images, in our home of Jesus, and so I think there's definitely some cautionary things to think about before you do that. I think it would be better to just have beautiful images that draw your mind toward God and his creative work. I think that would be better because, as you just pointed out, no artist, no matter how brilliant they are or how talented they are or how skilled they are, can capture the essence of God or even the essence of Jesus.
I think people violate Exodus 24 in their use of crucifixes. Some people are very attached to their crucifixes. They're like, oh, I can't go out of the house without my crucifix necklace, as if it provides some sort of protection for them. Christianity is not a religion of objects, and that includes crucifixes. So don't make yourself a carved image, be it a cross or anything else, and then somehow rely on that thing to save you.
Amen.
What saves you is God, the immortal, invisible God who is with you at all times, whether you're wearing your crucifix or not. All right. With all of that said, there's so much more entertainment to get to.
Oh, yeah.
But I think we've had a good discussion about what we watch on TV and on our computers. And
Well, I'm just interested in the next podcast to dig into the world of sports.
the world of sports.
We probably stepped on a few toes with entertainment. We're probably going to step on a few more when we get to sports.
That's going to be interesting. But we'll go ahead and call it quits for today. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that this podcast has helped you live out the word with your leisure and particularly your experience of entertainment. If it has, please share it with a friend or give us a 5-star rating. And until next time, God bless you.